A lot of the stories that have been in the press this week are situated around issues of justice and fairness. What is fair in all of the issues around the exam results, the A-levels, BTECs and the GCSEs to come? What is fair? What is a fair way of doing this? Are we being just to those involved, with those who are struggling to come across the channel as migrants? What is fair? What is just in their situation? With the Metropolitan Police closing the Stephen Lawrence inquiry into what really happened. Is that just? Is it fair? These are questions that we always ask, and they're ones that are right at the heart of Scripture, in particular in the stories that we hear today. And with that, we also have a sense of how we catch what God is saying to us. What is the next thing that God is saying to you and to me for the next chapter of our lives, and a sense that we will be surprised by that, and indeed we may need to struggle with that. So we have, first of all, this wonderful reading from the prophet Isaiah of a God who wants us to pursue justice. And you may say, well, anybody can say, we want justice. That doesn't really mean anything, does it? Well, if you read the verses before and afterwards in the prophet Isaiah, there's very clear understanding of what justice is. It is about the giving of your bread to those who are without, clothing those who are naked, housing those who are homeless, loosing the bonds from those who are oppressed. It's very clear what justice is all about in the Old Testament and indeed in the New Testament. And we have this image of the peoples coming to God's house of prayer. Now you may say, well, aren't there other parts of the Old Testament indeed where God's people are conquering the other nations? And indeed there are those accounts there. And while they have a spiritual message in the sense of God's people being protected, there are very troubling issues around how other nations are treated. And if you simply read the book of Judges and other passages in a very literal way and say, well, because it happened, that's the right thing, then I'm afraid I completely disagree with you. It is an emerging understanding of what it is to be God's people. And there are some very troubling passages there in the Old Testament. But we can place them alongside not only the passage we heard today, but in the laws in Deuteronomy give very clear protection for the alien in the midst of God's people. The aliens who come into their land are to be protected. So there is a debate, an unfolding revelation of what it is to be just and what it is to be inclusive. And this reading, in particular, if you study it, is quite extraordinary, really, because it is saying that God will accept the sacrifices, the practices, the religious means of all of the people, from all the foreigners who will come. It doesn't say they need to be converted to Judaism. It's all of those people. It's a wonderful image. And so we come then to our gospel account for today. And I find this one of the hardest ones to preach on, I have to say, in all of the New Testament. Because we find Jesus has gone to Tyre and Sidon. This is the land to the north of Israel, so he's in foreign territory. And he encounters a woman. For any Jewish man to encounter a woman out and about is an issue, first of all. She's a Syro-Phoenician woman, a Canaanite woman, so from one of those nations that are destroyed by God's people in the Old Testament. And she also has a daughter who she's crying out for, a daughter who is clearly suffering from mental health issues of some kind. So Jesus and the disciples encounter her, and we always talk, don't we, about God in Jesus being fully human and fully divine. Well, we see the fully humanness here, I think, very much so. The disciples say, let's get rid of her, because she's an inconvenience. She's not in the plan. They've gone to that land to escape from the crowds, to have a break, to have a bit of a retreat, maybe a bit of a holiday, get away from it all. And then the thing that's this very difficult thing, this difficult person, this difficult situation is encountered. And you can try and explain away the troubling dialogue here about giving food to the dogs. William Barclay, one of the great biblical commentators, talks about how you can visualize the kindness in Jesus's eyes and the sense of humor with the smile on his face. Well, yes, maybe. I think that's imagination, and you might want to imagine it that way. There is humor in the dialogue, certainly. But it is troubling nonetheless. So what is going on here? Well, what I think is going on here is that the God who is the God of all people and of all creation, that vision we heard from the prophet Isaiah, that is brought centre stage by this woman. And therefore the vision of God's kingdom, which of course we know Jesus fully shared and preached, and before this in the gospel chapters he has encountered the centurion, the Roman soldier with great faith, another Gentile who he commends. But she brings this centre stage, as it were. God's future becomes part of our present. It becomes part of Jesus' present there. And it's a challenge for you and for me about what in God's future, those things that perhaps you and I may aspire to, suddenly become a challenge to us here and now. So she's a tremendous example, the woman here, because it's that mixture of persistence and of humour and of challenge that enables her to transform this situation. So I think we sometimes have a rather one-dimensional view of our relationship with God, that it's a one-way street, that we wait for God to tell us things, that revelation comes in one way from God. I think Scripture shows us something much more dynamic, and here there is this dynamic encounter between Jesus and the woman. And here I think it's absolutely fair to say that Jesus is transformed, as well as the situation, by what she places in front of him. So for us, she is a real role model, and it prompts you and me to think about, well, what is it that is in God's future that actually should be in our present now? And I've been reading this book. You may wonder why I've been holding a book through this. It's by an author called A.D.A. France Williams. It's called Ghost Ship. And it's about, the subtitle is Institutional Racism and the Church of England. And boy, it's challenging reading. A.D.A. France Williams is a black priest here in the Diocese of, either Diocese of London or Diocese of Southwark. And it's incredibly challenging, because he takes those things that the sort of gradualism that I suppose, the sort of thing that appeals to me, the sort of dialogue that says, well, yes, it was terrible in the past, wasn't it? But we're getting better, aren't we? We're doing quite well. We should be patient. Those who are the victims of discrimination should be patient. It takes time, doesn't it? And he's saying, no. The time for change is now. In fact, the time for change has passed. That's really what he's saying. And he tells some very powerful stories in here. I mean, an example is when he is invited to go and preach at evensong at St Paul's Cathedral. And they're very kind to him and very welcoming. He kind of notes that he is about the only black face as he's in St Paul's at that time. But anyway, he goes up and he climbs up this very intimidating steps to the pulpit at St Paul's, and he looks. He's there in the pulpit, and there, emblazoned in front of him, engraved into the pulpit, is God and Empire. God and Empire. And so immediately, all of the insecurities that he has because of the history of slavery in his family and all of the discrimination against black people in the Church of England floods back in. And he just cites that as a little example of something that, if I climbed up into the pulpit there, I might go, oh, well, that's a bit quaint. It doesn't mean anything. Well, it does mean something. So I've been really prompted by this, and I feel that there'll be an equivalent for all of us. There's a challenge here institutionally for us as a church about how we are truly live out that vision of Isaiah. What is it that we are missing in the way that the disciples and Jesus were missing at the start of that gospel reading, that the woman brings fully to their attention? There will be things for us as a church to consider like that. There will be things for us individually to consider like that, about how we can be properly inclusive in that way, so that we can make this truly a house of prayer for all people, how, in terms of our society, we are truly inclusive of all people. I think we sang this at the service where I was licensed here just over a year ago. It's the Marty Horton modern hymn, Let Us Build a House Where All May Dwell. And that concludes with the words that I think are the message of this book, the message of this gospel, and the message for us to ponder, which is how can we truly say, all are welcome, all are welcome, all are welcome in this place.